For the next one, unfortunately the network here is up and down, so that's what I've been trying to do over the last couple of minutes. Hopefully it will hold, because this is really interesting. It has hardware in it, it has programming, it has some visual stuff, and personally I've been a developer for more than 20 years, and I think the future of dev tools are visual. So visual is kind of where it's going, and what Yulia is going to show you has to do with that sort of tools. So Yulia, go for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, so I'm Yulia, and I wanted to talk today about something I'm really enjoying and I've been enjoying for the past 2-3 months, and it's Node-RED. Has any of you heard about Node-RED before? Oh, that's nice. Couple of hands. Then the rest of us, the rest of you will have the chance to learn something new today. So we'll have a quick look at the history of it, what Node-RED is, how it works, and what can you do with it, who uses it, and why would you want to use it. So this is me. That's my Twitter handle with Alex, who was in the back but disappeared in the meantime. We're running a newsletter called Developer Avocados, and I am a developer advocate for Nexmo. But that hasn't been like that. Well, I've been working for Nexmo for a year now almost, but in a different position. And I always knew that there was this team called the Extend team. They were senior developers working on third-party integrations, building cool stuff with new and really cool hack, but definitely something that I was too junior for. So I never really looked. That tab was there all the time, and I never even clicked it because I was too afraid. So one of my colleagues one day came into the office to give a workshop on Node-RED to the support engineers. And I thought, well, what the heck? I might as well go and see what it's all about. And I got really interested in it. I managed to install it, start it, play around, and I never really looked back. So for the past 3 months, I've been working with Node-RED, and I changed my position, and now I'm part of the Extend team. So let's have a look at Node-RED, because that's why you're here. It all started back in 2013 at IBM. But it wasn't an IBM project. Nick O'Leary and Dave Conway-Jones were both IBM employees, but it was a personal project. Nick was trying to learn data visualization in the browser and also play around with Node.js. So it was a pet project of his. He was trying to map MQTT messages. And the two together developed Node-RED. And quickly, they started using it at IBM. And after that, it became open source. It was one of the founding projects of the JavaScript Foundation. And since this year, March, it's part of the OpenJS Foundation. It is also pre-installed on Raspberry Pis on the default Raspbian image, which is really kind of cool. So I came out of this workshop, and I went home super excited, wanting to learn more about this. And when I Googled Node-RED, this is what I found. So visual, flow-based programming and tool. Had to break it down. So flow-based, why flow-based? Flow-based programming actually started at IBM as well, but the Node-RED inventors didn't even know. It was J. Paul Morrison who introduced this programming paradigm. And he says that it's naturally component-oriented. I could read out the text, but probably this is a bit friendlier. It is a network of ASYNC black box processes. So Data comes in, something happens, data goes out. The connections are defined externally, which means they are interchangeable, reusable, and can infinitely be reconnected. The interface in between all these black boxes is data, which is, again, really cool for reusability. So when I looked at it, I found a couple of benefits for flow-based programming, including time reusability, rapid prototyping because reusable, performance, and good communication between people because it's visual, sort of. Yeah, so you could map out how things work. It's easier to talk about it, which made sense. So onto the visual stuff. Because I was kind of confused that the flow-based can be visual or not visual. So we are adding another visual on top of that. So human language is visual first. And it's been like that for a really, really long time. Whenever people want to grab our attention and make sure that we really understand something important, it's full of illustrations. If they need our attention on the streets to pay attention, for example, an area with kids, or traffic signs, again, it's visual. And we use visual stuff for just fun. It comes naturally. Also, another interesting thing is that recently visual recording and visual facilitation has been on the rise because Fortune 500 companies as well as conferences realize that that is how you really understand the concept. And when you go into a 2-hour-long meeting or a 2-hour-long talk, you probably lost 30 minutes in. So visuals are always good to be there to help. And ideas are visual. Like whenever things get complicated, we reach for the paper, we reach for the whiteboard, because that's how we can explain stuff. So why is programming not visual? Actually, I would like to ask you, when you recognize any of the following images, please raise a hand and keep it like that. Now, I would like to put your hand down if you just know about it, but never used it. And the people who used any of those to keep the hand up. Yeah, well, that's about 10%, 20? Yeah, the deal is that visual programming languages have been around since the 80s, 60s. But most of the users were either hobbyists, non-developers trying to learn development, kids getting into programming, and the usual IoT stuff. So why did developers, as in their day-to-day job, start using visual programming? Because it's all nice and fun, but challenges are a thing. Abstraction is hard. We'll get into that a bit later. Code reuse, when it's everything visual, you kind of get lost in all those connections. Defend merge, yeah. And code comments. People tend to argue that in visual programming languages, the code speaks for itself. Well, that never really works in any kind of programming language. So what is Node after all? We've heard the visual, the functional programming. So how does that get combined? It really is an embodiment of flow-based programming. So you've seen the little black box illustration. That is exactly how Node-RED works. It took some parts of visual programming, but put a twist on it. Visual programming is a no-code environment, but the Node-RED is low-code. You have visual. It is a visual interface, but you can still write your code. I recently found an article arguing for this. Thank you, Mike. That building with low-code interfaces and programming languages is more of the same as any other programming languages, as long as you're not writing machine code, and no, assembly doesn't count. So how does it work? It has two parts. It has a runtime and an editor. It is a lightweight Node.js application. It's completely written on top of Node.js. And it looks like this. So over here, you can see the nodes. These are the black boxes. Obviously, there are many, many more in there. Then this would be your workspace. You can just drag these nodes into the workspace, then just drag a wire in between them to express the connection. And the conglomeration of these nodes is called a flow. On the right-hand side, you can get info by clicking on any of the nodes, sort of a short documentation, what goes in, what goes out, so you know how to structure the data. And there is also debug. So that is just a little bit in action. Yeah. So nodes, wires, flows. Cool thing is that all these can be expressed with JSON. The nodes themselves, as I mentioned before, are the black boxes. The individual asynchronous processes. But they are also node modules. And you can write your own nodes. Everything on Node.js, you know Node.js, you can write it. Wherever Node.js runs, you can run it. The wires, the connection. Well, the connectors, the external connectors, as mentioned, for flow-based programming. And the interface in between is the data. For each and every node, the input and output is data. And the flows as well. You can do subflows, which is saving the flow you created, defining an input and an output, and reusing that whole flow as part of another flow. And import and export. It's really easy. All done as JSON. Now, I will attempt to do something with internet, if that is possible. Yeah, about that. Apologies. So there is the Node-RED library. You can export your flows and upload them in here. But the chances are that whatever you're doing, someone at least partially already tried to do that. And you can just have a look in here. And you can search for different APIs for example, the ones we as a company contributed. Well, internet fails, what a shock. So I opened up one over here. That's just a short description. And then this is the whole flow. It's all in JSON. Now, I will try to copy this if I can see. All right. So I open up my editor, and there is an import option. And I can select to import from clipboard. All I do is I paste it here. I can select if current flow or new one. Current is fine because it's empty. And it takes a bit. And here we go. So I just imported something that has a full functionality, and I haven't written anything, I haven't done anything. But usually with code, when you take it from somewhere, OK, what does this do? And the cool thing is there are info nodes. And you can come here in the information part and just have a look at it. It is GitHub flavored Markdown, so you can customize it however you want. I was in a hurry, so this is pretty plain. But that is quite helpful. For example, most of my time hacking with new stuff is spent reading the documentation and then trying to figure out what the documentation says, where to get the code, how to put them all together. But in this way, you can have all of that together. So let's try to go back to. Oops. OK, remember the challenges from visual programming? Well, we can cross 2 of those off the list, because code reuse is not hard. That was just for the flows. You can do the same thing with nodes. Same way exported, same way imported. Code comments are not hard, but then abstraction. That's the bottleneck of visual programming. And as you could see, Node-RED is visual as well. So what do we do about the abstraction? Because the more abstract something is, the more limited. On a way, abstraction is good, because it takes you to the essence of the programming. You don't really deal with the boilerplate code. You don't do the same exact thing day in, day out, all over again. And you can go on to where your real value is as a programmer. But on the other hand, this is Scratch. And people love it. By that I mean non-developers and kids. It's an amazing platform for learning coding, but it's a toy. So I would like you to think of this versus Node-RED as Duplo is compared to Lego. Both of them do more or less the same, but one can go deeper and is fully customizable. In Node-RED, there are function nodes, so you're in the flow, you are almost done, but there is just something that you cannot do with one node from the node palette. You open up a function node, you write your Node.js, no problem, deploy, good to go. And custom nodes, you can write literally anything you'd like. There is a JS file that defines the functionality, and then there is HTML with CSS that defines how it would look like in the node editor. And that is that simple. For example, our company has this way custom nodes in the node palette that map one-to-one with our libraries. Not fully covered, but functionality-wise, it's the same. So I think we can agree on the fact that abstraction is not hard when the only shortfalling of abstraction is covered. So hard to diff and merge. That's a big one, because how would you put all that stuff on GitHub when it's visual? Well, the good thing is that 2 releases ago, projects were introduced. You can enable them in your Node-RED application, and you have full Git integration. You get this pop-up when you first log in after you enabled it, and you can create project, clone repository, and you can follow all this. Now, that data I just showed you in the flow library was a bit chunky, as in you can't really read it like code. So how will you know what differences were made? It's going to take a long time. The good thing is that Node-RED will do that for you. Actually, in the interface, whenever you do a commit, it will do a diff. You see which nodes were affected, what was the change, and it will also say if it will break anything or not. So that's really cool. To be honest, since I started using it, I never had to use this. But if you want to, then it's there, and it's really helpful in certain situations. But I'm working alone, so. OK, so let's see if my demo works. So for this demo, I brought a Raspberry Pi with a Sans hat. Because, well, that's where it started. It's not only IoT, but that was the first idea. So I thought I could honor that with this one. Let's just move it a bit over. OK. So let's see what it does and then go a bit into detail. I'll try to show this. Not sure how much people can see it. So it goes full RGB, depending on the direction of rotation. I'm extremely sorry. I prepared a demo with APIs and interesting stuff. But internet is not on my side this day. Problem is I can't really see it. So Sans Hat is what I have on top of this, the LEDs. And for that, there is a Node-RED package. I downloaded it, installed it in my instance. Cool. I did the same thing for the Raspberry Pi. And those are the only custom nodes I'm using. So I'm taking input from the Sans Hat for all motion events. And then I'm setting here a bit of a limit, because maybe 10 events a second is not what we want to see. And after that, I set colors. So there are 3 directions this can move. One is this plane, basically the XYZ, this way, and then this way. And those are the 3 parameters I'm pulling. Sorry. So yeah, that's not working. So those were the 3 parameters I'm pulling in there. but then how do I make that into colors? Because rotation is 360 degrees, but then colors only go to 255 in RGB. So I'm just simply mapping it out, and this node will do everything for me. So I am setting one direction for red, one direction for blue, and the other one for green. And it does a bit of templating. So that it gives the value in the way the sans hat will understand. And it goes back there. So, yeah, basically that would be it. Now, I will attempt one last time to see if internet is cooperating. What I'm doing here is I'm disabling a flow because you can run all of them together, but that wouldn't be too smart when I'm using the same device. So for this one, I'm using a Twitter node. I'm pulling in data from all public tweets for a certain hashtag. I thought I'd pick something that is quite busy so that we can actually see something. Then there is a default sentiment analysis node in Node-RED. It only takes the message.payload. This is the default data that travels in between the nodes. But you can also change it and feed it something else. What this will do is it will take certain words of the text that goes in, and it rates the words with certain numbers, negative with minus, and then positive with plus, one at a time. So 2 bad words, -2, 1 good, +1. So it works like that. And then I'm getting a score as an output, which defines if the sentiment was negative or positive or neutral, or how bad or how good. Now, for simplicity, I picked ranges. So this is the less than 0 for negative, then equal with 0 for neutral, bigger for positive. And we'll get back to the rest a bit later. And then I'm wiring up for those 3 options a template node, for which I am setting that property to this value. So if it's negative, it's going to blink red. It's the exact same thing for the rest of them, except for good it's green, and for neutral it's white. And then the sans hat node takes all that in, not really a lot to configure. Also, I thought that this is nice and blinking lights, but if I was a company, for example, and was trying to monitor Twitter, I would want to know if there's something really bad going on. So, or something really good, someone's really happy with our services. And for that, I would like to isolate extremes. So I added another template node connected to values which are less than -3, which is not that bad, but I'm guessing no one is that negative about Game of Thrones, so I wanted it to actually go through. And higher than 3 for something really positive. And in that case, I want to get a notification. This is another third-party node, happens to be Nexmo. I just put in my credentials, which I can edit here, but if I open it up, then my private key will be public. And I set where it goes from number and then a text. Now, the interesting thing about this is that that's a variable. So Node-RED allows templating with Mustache.js. And that's really cool and useful for passing stuff. I was impressed. And if we have internet, then it should work. Yes, I get a notification for the other flows I have running. And we can check the debug. Internet. Yeah, no internet. OK. But trust me, it works. So who uses it? Because that was a really nice toy, but seriously. This is going to be interesting because these are YouTube videos. So I'll post my slides online after this is finished. My favorite use case, not necessarily the most impressive or renowned or best, but really, honestly, my favorite is the Jacques Cartier Bridge in Montreal. This is running on Pis, Raspberry Pis, and Node-RED. And it takes data from the whole city, processes it, and then the bridge comes to life. So it always looks different depending on what's going on in the city. Node-RED also lists a couple of companies that are using them. There are companies that are doing Node-RED as a service. So they're just offering an instance, doing their own stuff. But many are using it for something else. And that list is definitely not extensive. For example, if you go into the Flow library, you get, last time I checked, 3,000 plus integrations. I am definitely sure it's more now. And companies just like us are using it not necessarily as a partnership, but just for themselves. This is another really cool thing. The problem is this is, again, a video. So it's, again, in Canada. And it's, again, running on Raspberry Pis and Node-RED. They are illuminating a whole field and forest. And it's an interactive journey that you can take through that. So on to my final thoughts. When I pick a tool, I look at a couple of things, because all this is nice, but at the end of the day, it comes down to 4 criteria. Is it flexible and extendable? Am I really sure that if I start using it, I don't get to the point where, ooh, and now what are we doing? Because this particular thing cannot be done with it. It is flexible, it is extendable, it's built on Node.js. That is my thing. So that's a check for me. OK. Support adoption. It is open source, and it has been like that for a long time. It has a great community behind it, and more companies are picking up on it. The community is super reactive. I have a question, I have an answer in 5 minutes. That is great. It's constantly coming up with new releases. That's, again, a check for me. And collaboration, if you are a team, how can you use it? Because for an individual, yeah, that's good. You can also collaborate with it. You have Git integration, so I think that's as extensive as most teams get. But also collaboration with other departments. Because if you have a Node application open, you can't really go to marketing, sales, and other departments and say that, OK, so this is what we're going to talk about in this meeting. But having that visual element and that abstraction, things are clearer and easier to understand. So it does not necessarily require a senior developer to look at it and get the idea. And they don't have to bother with all the nitty-gritty stuff because, one, that's not their job. Two, they don't need to. So that's a check again. And cost. Well, there are some really similar tools out there. And I start looking at the documentation, looks good. Demo apps looks good. 500 euros per month, thank you very much. It's an open source project. It's really a community thing. And as long as you have a community, it works. Also, Nick and Dave are still working on it. I feel really good about it. So I hope I get to use it for a long time, because this is my job now and I'm loving it. So thank you very much. If you have any questions,